Hi there. In this lecture we see Emanuel Lasker playing against Adolf Albin, and if that name rings a bell, it's because of the Albin countergambit, which Albin popularized in the 1890s. So Lasker played d4, d5, c4, and now the surprise move e5. And I have to confess, I've been quite an addict of this gambit in my live commentaries. I have a big playlist for the Albin counter gambit, and it's a very interesting game historically to check out. So it is quite a shocking gambit. We have d takes e5, d4, and here it's important not to go into the Lasker trap. You know, e3, there's the Lasker trap actually, bishop b4 check, where black can get away with d takes here, and if bishop takes, e takes f2, and the king can't take without losing the queen. And the other point is on king e2, black takes a knight basically. So basically with a knight, and that's check. And then bishop g4 check, ouch. So there's the Lasker trap in the Albin counter gambit, a well-known trap. But, you know, Lasker with the white pieces, yeah, he avoids that trap. Knight f3, knight c6. a3, a very logical, sensible move to just cut out bishop b4. Bishop g4. And now here, this is quite intriguing. At move 6, Lasker actually plays h3. If you look at this with, like, the top neural network engines today, like Stockfish, h3 is really one of the top moves, it seems. All the rage nowadays is knight bd2. I mean, this looks safe enough, not really encouraging any structural issue. And for example, h3 here is leading to an advantage. For example, if bishop takes, knight takes, this situation, there's queen takes d4. No fear. White's fine there, getting that center pawn. And if bishop h5, g4, bishop g6, bishop g2. This position with knight takes e5 is also very nice for white, taking out b7. So it seems, you know, knight bd2 sure is like one of the golden popular moves nowadays. But nevertheless, h3 is actually interesting. Very interesting. We have bishop takes f3. If bishop h5 is played, then g4 is possible and bishop g2. That's great for white. But bishop takes f3 is played, and now curiously g takes is played. This is not so hot as e takes, it seems. G takes is a bit of a mistake. If e takes was played, the reason why this might be stronger, let's look into this for a moment. Knight takes e5, f4, knight g6, there's bishop d3. And this isn't bad for white. The light square control is pretty good. The problem with the Albin counter gambit, and I know this from great experiences with it, is that the light squares have been slightly compromised with that pawn on d4. And we see here, you know, white's got very comfortable position here. For example, c5, tactically, you know, black's not in a position to do this. For example, here, queen b5 check, winning the pawn. You might have thought, well, what about bishop takes c5? Even worse. Queen b5 check, winning a piece. It's a very, very comfortable position, it turns out, on e takes f3. Yeah, this is a fascinating line. It shows that actually h3 has got some venom. But with g takes f3, it could have been a different story. After knight takes e5 f4, it looks like maybe an intuitive move to support the central pawn with knight c6. But yeah, knight takes c4 runs into queen a4 check. That can be ruled out. But knight g6 is interesting. A sort of tangoing knight, where this bishop can be blunted with c6, and the f4 pawn, you know, is a bit of a concern. And this line, you know, it should be fine for black to take out f4. Black should actually be with an advantage there if white really did play like that. Yeah, it's fascinating that this knight g6 seems to be a more critical test than knight c6. And now Lasker kind of gets all he wants, as Magnus Carlsen would say, you know, from the opening. You want to get something from the opening, but it's great light square pressure. The two bishops. the celebration on light squares, it's particularly pronounced because actually now the f4 pawn ruling out the use of e5 makes things even worse. So b4 gaining space and threatening to dislodge that knight. So a6, bishop b2. So a lot of pressure on the black centre. So black's trying to defend d4. So this is a familiar story. And now regret might be creeping in here because of the threats emerging. Knight f5 trying to hold on to d4. Queen d3. Very annoying. Bishop e7. Bishop e4 dislodging that knight. And now knight c5. White's actually increasing advantages here. So that was hitting the queen. No time to take on e4. Now the bishop drops back. It's a pretty vicious position. You can see that white has a fantastic position. This isn't a fantastic advert right now for the Albin countergambit. And it does remind me, I've played the Albin countergambit actually too many times. I should have been playing more theoretically. But it is like a fun kind of surprise gambit. Those surprise gambits which you can play early on in the game, they're quite tempting, especially at the faster time controls. They're very tempting for fun and entertainment, if nothing else. And sometimes you win with them as well, because you avoid tons of the opponent's opening theory. At the faster time controls, that means a lot more. But in a serious game like this looks like a miserable position. If this is like a one-day game, it looks like a pretty, which it is. It's the New York tournament round 12. Which Lasker did pretty well in, by the way. Yeah, he did actually win all his games. Spoiler alert. So every single game, he won in this tournament. 13 out of 13. 100%. Yeah, so yes. Adolf Albin lost. Sorry, but most of the games I'm showing in this course, Lasker does actually win them. You may have suspected that already. So black castled. If queen f5, can you see why this is a disaster? What does white play here for 100 points? Yeah, just undermining c6. Knight takes b7 is a vicious tactic with that bishop without the counterpart. I mean, there's already juicy light squares against the Albin countergambit when there's a pawn on d4, but here the bishop as well without the counterpart. Knight takes, we're taking the queen. And on queen takes, we're taking on c6 with check first before taking on d3. And that protects our knight. Piece up. So it's a lot of pressure here. So we have black castling. Rook g1. And this looks ideal, dreamy kind of road to the king. Knight e8. Knight b3. So safeguarding this knight, putting more pressure on d4. Queen d7, and now white castles queenside. White's really got such a powerful position here with the bishop pair, with the g-file, with the light square control. Queen d6, we have king b1. Okay. Letting f4 go. This might be a small inaccuracy. There's another way just to protect the pawn. So, for example, bishop h4, we can take on d4 here, and look at this convergence potentially on g7, with the bishop and the rook. This is also, this looks pretty crushing. This kind of stuff looks crushing, but it actually, it's, it's very, very bad for black. So king b1 might be a small let-off, but not that much of a let-off. Queen takes f4, rook g4, queen h6. And now, Lasker dismantles that pawn. Bishop takes c6. Rook takes d4, taking out that centre pawn. Rook d6 makes things much worse. Rook takes d4. Bishop takes d4. Queen e6. Sure, this is bad for black. This is bad. But the game is actually worse. After rook g3, clear advantage for white. Knight in front of double pawns. That's lovely. But rook d6 makes things a load worse after c5. Rook e6. We have queen takes a6. Black plays here queen takes h3. There's only a small compensation to take out that pawn. Rook 4 to d3. Hitting the queen, queen g2. But that move not just hit the queen, it vacated d4. And now knight d4 hitting the rook and protecting e2. The rook goes to f6. But now there's a move which is kind of exploiting a weakness from the last move, actually. What has this neglected by moving there? The energy has gone to somewhere else, but the energy is left somewhere else. It's actually neglected the e-file. So can you see what white does to pounce on the weakness of the last move, basically? And it's quite crushing here, funny enough. This is a configuration which is ruling out the knight moving anywhere. The knight can't move anywhere. It's blocked in by its own pawn there and there. And it's also blocked out of d6. So the knight's kind of hemming in the rook. But what happens after rook e3? Well done if you found this. Because look at this awkward situation indeed with these double pawns. It's like they're not helping the pieces really with that pawn on c5. And white plays a really crushing blow here, which is, it's fascinating in this configuration that this is such a powerful move. So what does white play here for 100 points? It's a really sharp tactical move. There is an unprotected piece downside in theory of the black position. How do we exploit that one? Okay, yeah, knight c2. It protects the rook. It hits d8. So there's no real effectiveness of queen takes because that rook's protected. What does black do about the bishop on d8? It's a funny position that black's in this state with that knight on e8. It is kind of funny. I mean, maybe not so much for Albin here. So rook takes f2 was played, just losing a piece in broad daylight. But what does black actually do? Knight d6? I mean, that's another way of losing a piece. But first, we could even take on f6 first and then take... There's no point. So rook takes f2 and just rook takes d8. And there's nothing going on here. Black's just, busted. e2 is adequately protected. There's no counterplay. It's all been squished. Black's losing material. Yeah, this wasn't a fantastic advert for the Albin countergambit by Adolf Albin. In some databases with limited games, he hasn't actually done that well with his own gambit. He's lost more than he won with it. I would say it is a little bit dodgy, to be honest. On the long time controls, it's a good surprise weapon sometimes, especially if an opponent maybe just doesn't know what to do about the Albin countergambit and is theoretically prepared for everything else. But yeah, this wasn't a great advert. This was like how to crush the Albin countergambit. But in a way, also there was an improvement. There's an improvement with e takes f3 as well. Black did have a possibility the way it was played, but kind of didn't use it. This f-pawn with knight g6. Unfortunate, yeah. White really got a lot of positional trump cards out of this game from the opening, the way it was played after knight c6 in particular. There would have been something, for black to have fun with on knight g6, it seems. So knight g6 had to be played. Blunt the bishop, use that square for a pawn to blunt the bishop, and try and target, f4 later, with moves later, or use the blockading square f5, knight h6, f5. There are plans for black here, and it's a much better version of events than the game. If we use the f5 square, sometimes that's going to be nice with this bishop locked in. Black does have stuff to play for in this position, but it wasn't needed. Yeah, there's an improvement. E takes f3, and that actually, it shows, interestingly, an underrepresentation in what's played today, which is routinely, basically, knight bd2. Fascinating stuff. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much.